Welcome to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. I'm Tony Guerra, pharmacist, publisher, and professional editor, bringing you interviews and advice on succeeding in your residency journey. You can sign up for the email list at pharmacyresidencypodcast.com to get your free LOI template or get editing help working one-on-one with me at residency.teachable.com. Let's get started with the show. Super excited about today's show because we have two pharmacy professionals that will be interviewing each other about getting in as a non-traditional residency applicant. So before we get started with the show, what I actually want to do is go over the numbers and show you how your chances have dramatically increased from what we see in 2018 to now 2022. All right, the place to find these data is at ASHP Match Stats. That's what I put into Google to get here. And we're going to go into applicants, combined phase 1 and 2. And we're going to first look at 2018 and then 2022. So let's look at 2018, and we'll make this quite a bit bigger. So if you're looking on something mobile, you'll see the numbers here. And what we want to look at are the match results by year of graduation. So back in 2018, pre-2018 graduates matched 139 out of 398 applicants. The quick math on that is 34.9%, so about a 1 in 3 chance of matching if you got an interview. However, when we look at 2022, we see really good news for those of you that are thinking, maybe I'd like to do a residency. 184 out of 319, which gives us a 57.6% match rate. So that's really close to what was around 60-something% last year for traditional students. And we expect this number to continue to go up. So I'm not going to take all of their steam away from them, but just know that there are significant chances for you to get a residency now if you were out in practice. And really there are a lot of advantages as we have a NABPLEX rate that is declining. It's nice to know, especially in California, where the CPJE is, the rates are pretty low. And then the MPJE also really often a barrier to getting that license. So nice as an RPD to have that comfort knowing that this student already has a license, and that's just not going to be an issue. And then you're going to hear quite a bit from them about confidence and having that confidence already working with providers, already being out there. And I get why residency would be something you do right after school, especially when it comes to finances, which they do talk about. But I think that it's almost more like an MBA, where the traditional MBA, you were expected to go out into practice for 1 to 4 years and then come back to the MBA program and share what it was that you did as an entry-level business person. In the same way, I think that it's really valuable to have those residents that have been out in practice for a couple of years, that have that comfort, looking really understand what they want and why they want to do it. Now, let's just look at the numbers. Because when you think about the number of 2022 graduates, the total number of graduates, you had about 15,000. And when you talk about how many applied or registered for the match in the first place, you're talking about 6,486, so maybe 40%, something like that. Now you're talking about every single graduate that was before 2022 in this pile, and only very few of that number, it's actually the 5427 number, 184 ended up matching, which is out of that kind of 319. So you can see these numbers are dramatically different, and it takes so much courage to come back and to do this, to do the extra work that it takes. But as you'll see, these guys really have a commitment to the profession. And the direction that they want to go in the future is absolutely clear. So without further ado, Mary Ngo and Amy Lee will be coming onto the show.
Hi, everyone. My name is Mary. And my name is Amy Lee.
And we will be taking over today's episode on the Pharmacy Podcast Network on behalf of Dr. Tony Gura. For this session, we will be talking more expansively about the non traditional pathway to residency.
And what we mean by non-traditional pathway to residency, this would be somebody that has been out of school for several months, even years, and they've been working as a pharmacist, and now they're trying to go back to a residency to pursue a clinical career or to further their career in pharmacy. And so to start off our conversation, I guess we can start introducing ourselves. We'll start with Mary.
Yeah, sure. I can go ahead. I am currently a PGY1 pharmacy resident over at the VA San Diego at San Diego, California. And I went to Chapman University School of Pharmacy for pharmacy school in Southern California as well. I did their 2+3 fast track program, so 2 years undergrad, 3 years in my PharmD curriculum. And from there, I have also done at least a good 2 to 3 years of work after graduating in 2019 as a pharmacist. Gone involved during the past few years, and with all the support that I've had, went into the residency cycle, and I chose to really go back to residency for my passion and providing patient care in the AM care setting, as well as psychiatry as well, and then also teaching. If Amy, if you want to kind of give a quick introduction of yourself, now that I kind of shared a little bit about me.
Sure, absolutely. Again, my name is Amy Lee. I am a current PGY1 resident at Ascension Genesis Hospital in Grand Blanc, Michigan. I graduated in 2015 from the University at Buffalo Pharmacy School, and I've been practicing since 2015. I've done a little bit at a state psych hospital for a couple of years, in the ambulatory care setting, outpatient setting, a little bit of hospice for several years in Washington. I've done a little bit of informatics, a little bit of ED, a little bit of inpatient pharmacy, and now I'm back to a residency program. And the reason being that I am very passionate about emergency medicine. That is something that I want to pursue. I was looking into a PGY2 in emergency medicine, and that's really kind of where I want to be. I want to be an emergency medicine specialist, and thought that um, it'd be a good way to kind of further my career and kind of look at that option being a PGY1 resident.
The experience and your drive for wanting to go back into residency is definitely admirable, Amy. Especially, I know what like there's like a lot of challenges, especially in like having to like go into the acute care setting, working after quite some time before going back, and so honestly, like major props.
And to you as well, Mary. I mean, we met on LinkedIn, but I've seen your profile. You've been involved in a lot of different organizations. It seems like you do a lot in the ambulatory care setting. You've got your
Mhm.
certification in MTM. And so I know you've been really involved, and that's kind of how, we've met and to kind of come to where we're at doing this podcast.
And I'm actually very excited to be able to talk with you about this too, because a lot of times with those who finish pharmacy school, like they're in their final year trying to apply for residency. And I was actually one of those students that did try to apply back then as a final year and didn't really match. So, given like my personal circumstances, I ended up having to work for some time, help to support family, and be able to also like provide like a lot of community like service to those in like Orange County from where I'm from. A lot of preventative healthcare services during like my gap years. So very happy to talk a lot more about like the process, as well as certain things to kind of look out for, especially going into the cycle. And so we can kind of talk a little bit more about like our transition when it comes
Yeah.
like
So
coming.
you probably have gotten this question a lot too, but everyone kind of asks you, "Hey, how does it feel? Like, how are you doing being a pharmacist, earning the salary that you do, and now going back into a residency? How is that transition? How are you settling?" So have you noticed anything? How has your transition being pharmacist now going into a residency again?
Yeah, honestly, like one of the things that, again, with finances, it's something that I had to kind of build over time. And when it came to the idea of residency, it didn't really come up in my mind until like I probably, like, I guess my start of like my second or even third year out of school, and that's when I decided, hey, I'm gonna go back. I knew that I wanted to go into psychiatry. I knew that if I did go into residency, that there would be a financial pay cut that is involved. And then my fear when it came into applying for the residency cycle was, I guess, the fear of like a third eye that is kind of watching me from some of these like programs, as to kind of like having like a higher like expectation out of me. But really, when it comes to residency training, like I guess like in terms of my transition from going from pharmacist to pharmacy resident, I've come to realize that with residency training, all of your preceptors, as well as your co-residents, are really all in this together when it comes to furthering professional growth. And I think one of the things that I've been told at least 5 times already so far in my residency is that, when it comes to like going back into residency, there's always something to learn. There's always areas for improvement. One common thing that I've been told by my preceptors is that you're in residency for a reason. You're in there to learn, to become a better practitioner, better than before. And, when I was a pharmacist, I mean, the thing is, there are still things out there that I feel as though I still didn't know. Like, I wanted to be able to expand on all of that. And so when it came to the transition from pharmacist to pharmacy resident, it did feel kind of interesting to kind of slowly kind of retract, I guess, in a way where you kind of are coming back to being a learner. But the process over time, as you kind of get back into that learner mindset, it's something that I had found very enjoyable over time. It's like kind of being able to not just relearn, like learn a new system. You're also learning about other ways that pharmacists are involved in providing patient care in ways that sometimes you never really knew, like before, like when you're in pharmacy school.
And I totally agree. We use the term learner a lot at my residency too, and I don't know why, but I love being called a learner. Being a pharmacist and somebody who's been out of school for so long, you don't kind of, I mean, you are a learner, you're continuously learning with your education, RCEs and whatnot, but you're never really in that role to be an active learner where you're learning new things like you mentioned. And so for me, that part has been a blessing. And also, I've had some issues with it too. I've gotten a lot of feedback that because I've been out of pharmacy school for a long time and I've been practicing independently, communicating with providers, very casually, and I guess also with a little bit more confidence than a new grad might be. They were kind of surprised at how easily I communicate, and that's being said nicely, with other providers, and how the interactions were a little bit different than what they expected. So I feel like that part's been really easy, where you're able to communicate with providers, nursing staff, whether it's medical residents, other people. That's something that you and I have been working on a lot, being a pharmacist and being out of school for a long time and practicing. But then, other parts are different. I haven't been able to, I didn't really need to do a journal club or a bunch of presentations or a research project, and managing, longitudinal rotations along with your monthly rotations and other commitments that you've got. So, time management definitely is a tough part. I thought I was really great at it, but, when it comes to residency, it's something that I still need to work on. So I feel like, the transition's been nice. There's been some easy stuff, some of the things that I also need to work on, but, I don't regret going into a residency program. So speaking of, what kind of things did you look at when you were choosing your residency program? I know you have your interest in ambulatory care and psychiatry, so I'm sure that played a role, but what other things did you look at?
Oh yeah, so I actually wanted to kind of stay close to home too. I mean, a lot of people will kind of like think otherwise, which is good because it does kind of expand like your location. I like to call like these factors that that like a candidate looks for as like a net, like all of these threads that make up this net that you're trying to cast out there for all of these residency programs. Those threads would be something like, for me it was like ambulatory care, being able to provide like services that relate to transitions of care, also being involved in teaching and preceptorship, and also mental health as well. And being able to own in on that, I'd be able to kind of narrow down as to what I would be able to kind of catch, or like be able to kind of look at when it comes to scanning through like programs that I was interested in, really. Another thing, being also getting involved in interprofessional care, something that I've actually wanted to get more involved in. I did have some of that when I was working in my outpatient pharmacy, at like the psychiatric hospital in Orange County, though I felt as though it wasn't enough. Like I wanted more, where I was actually making more clinical interventions over time, and so that was important for me. And then I guess last but not least, work life balance. It's something that, we think about like the focus areas that we want to like specialize in, whether we want to go into like acute care, ambulatory care, psychiatry, emergency medicine, stuff like that. But the thing that is very important, especially to keep yourself sane for residency, is the work life balance. That is something that I truly needed to look at, that I feel like a lot of applicants don't really consider much. It's more like they want to just get into they want to be able to get into a program, but if you match, you're there and you have to stay there, and you have to make sure that, your time management is like perfect, or not perfect, but at least well managed, and be able to take care of yourself and also know your priorities too. And if you don't take care of yourself and do any of that, burnout happens in residency, and that is common.
I absolutely agree with you there. That is definitely something I've actually lacked to prioritize. I was one of those people who really wanted a residency. So I said, I'm going to get into a program. Whatever comes at me, I can handle it. I'm just going to do it. But it really worked out for me because I hear these stories of other people crying on rotation, being really stressed out, being burnt out earlier in the residency year. And I feel like I'm not. So I'm very happy with that. And yes, work life balance, mental health, very, very important. Some of the things that I looked at was a little bit more practical. Being somebody who's been out of school and have been practicing and kind of have my lifestyle, I did look at a salary that was kind of important to me. So I did the calculator where I could figure out how much my take home pay would be after taxes, all that stuff, and then kind of compared it with the cost of living to see if it was reasonable, or if I'm going to be spending like 50% of my paycheck on rent, and then I'm going to be really miserable because I have to pay for my car and the insurance and all these other stuff that you don't really think of. So that was really important to me, as somebody who's been practicing and was earning a different kind of income than a student might be. The other thing was location. It takes a lot of money to move. Maybe not for a student, but if you have a family, or if you've been out and you've been living in by yourself in an apartment, and you have all these furniture and items that you've gathered out through 3-4 years, moving that takes time, takes a lot of money. So that's something that I had to consider, that I didn't want to move too far, and I kind of put a range of like, moving within 6 hours of where I was at. So I kind of did like a plus minus point system for that. Another thing was licensing. I moved around a lot, as I kind of mentioned, for these different jobs. So I have a lot of licenses in different states. So I tried to stick to some of those states that I already have licenses in. Again, like because of the cost, it takes a lot of money to get licensed, to take the exam, and a lot of time as well. So that's something that I wanted to reduce. And that's something that I think, as somebody who's been out of school and have been practicing for a while, that might come in your favor. Since you're already licensed, you don't need to worry about that stress of being licensed in the state if that's where you apply. And so some of those things are kind of what I considered. among the normal other things like what kind of rotations are available, how many electives do you get to choose, what are the preceptors like, and just the general stuff like that.
Yeah, and I agree. I highly agree, Amy. Like, the thing is, like, when it comes to being like licensed, like you're working as a pharmacist, you're already like checking off one box when it comes to like your time as a resident. You have to be licensed by like a certain amount of days, and you have nothing to stress about, which is great. And like, I honestly had to kind of help with some of my co-residents. Actually, I have like a good like handful of residents in my residency class who were pretty stressed out about like both their transition and into residency from being a student, and also having to stress over their board exams. I couldn't imagine like what they were going through. I was trying to help them out in whatever way that I could, and providing them like any materials that I had that could help them, especially for law, because California law, right? So
Absolutely. I heard they're going
mhm.
to an MPJE now. Is that true?
I have no idea. I
Yeah.
know I know CSHP is trying to do something about that, but I don't know. It's up in the air right now. Wait, so Amy, I'm kind of curious. Like, what factors would you say would be strongly considerable for non-traditional residency applicants during the season right now?
So I think, if you're trying to apply for residencies this year, you don't really have a lot of options to improve on. The leadership thing, you only have maybe a month or two at best window. So it's a little bit tough to get a lot of these activities in, whether it's leadership or trying to do some research or getting involved in, pharmacy organizations. So it really comes down to selling yourself, making sure they know where you're coming from. I think a lot of the questions that programs want to know are, why are you pursuing residency at this time in your career? What are you trying to get out of it? Where are you trying to go? So I feel like the letter of intent is really important. So I had to, really make sure people knew where I was coming from, why I wanted to pursue residency, what I've been doing to try to get to my career path, the goal that I wanted to go to, and how residency would help even at this time in my career, how that's going to help me further my career pathway. So I feel like letter of intent is something that I feel like we could focus on, as a non-residency or non-traditional residency candidate, especially during this time. What
Mhm.
about you? What do you think would be important to kind of consider during this time?
This is a good question that like it really applies for both like non-traditional and final year students too, where when it comes to like these interests that you have, like kind of going back to that analogy that I had about like your net, the threads that make up your net, you want to make sure you really know your interests, or at least really have like a good reason as to why you want to go back. That's something that I think is most important. You want to make it loud and clear, why you want to go back. They can see that through your applications, they can see that through your letters of intent. That's something that you really need to make sure that you make clear, especially because they will have to go through so many different applications during the process. And you want to make sure that you're able to get things out there clear and concise, as much as possible as well. I would say, and when it came to some of my application materials, I definitely had to look into different groups of people to figure out who was going to write my recommendation. And so I had to approach some of these residency program directors to see what they wanted to look for in a letter of intent for somebody who had been out of school for at least a couple years or so. And this is what they had told me. They had told me that they had wanted to look into those recommendations that talk about your leadership skills and also your practical skills. So leadership skills being like your active roles in certain organizations or maybe even work, for example. Rather than just a title on the paper, they want to really know like the stories behind the roles that you have played. Practical skills, how your work ethic is like, how team oriented you are, and then also clinical skills to research skills, scholastics, those could all be like one or two different letters. Research wasn't too big on the radar for some of the other applicants who were just similar to me. They didn't do research, but they did match. I did do some research that it wasn't really like statistical research or anything, but it was more like the type of research that was talking about like providing services to a community and kind of writing like kind of a review of that. But clinical skills, scholastic skills, um, certification programs, keeping up with clinical updates, providing clinical recommendations to providers. If you have like a former preceptor that you had worked with in the past very closely or have kept in touch with, or even professors, maybe they could even write your letters of recommendation for you too. And so I would definitely kind of nail it down to those factors to consider for a letter of recommendation and kind of weave that into letters of intent. Again, really just trying to make your interests loud and clear, why you really want to go back to residency despite being out of school for a couple years or so.
I think you brought up a good point there where you mentioned you would talk to program directors about, what you want to see. And I've done similar things for letters of recommendations because, some programs are really specific. We want to see a faculty member or we want to see two clinical preceptors. And if you've been out of school for, 4 or 5 years, let's say, how well can they talk about your current skills when your rotation was 5 years ago? You're a completely different person now, I hope.
I
You've
agree.
improved, you're better at things, you're better at communication skills, clinical skills, motivation wise. Obviously, you're there if you want to pursue a residency at this point. So, I've personally also asked for those type of programs that we're looking for specific preceptors and professors, like, is it okay if I give you somebody else instead? Would it be more appropriate, or do you absolutely need a professor? And 9 out of 10 times, maybe 10 out of 10 times, they want somebody who is more recent and can speak to your skills, your communication skills, your current knowledge, and your current state versus something that you might have had 5 years ago. So it's not really a big deal if you're trying to pursue residency now and you're thinking, oh my God, I haven't really talked to my professor in 3 years. How am I going to get this letter of recommendation? You might be able to ask, your colleague. I've used a couple of colleagues this year. I've used a couple of um, managers and supervisors. So like, this year, I've actually used everyone kind of from my workspace and no one from previous rotations or from school or anything like that. So there's options out there. Don't be discouraged that you've been out of school for such a long time and you have lost contact with all these school people.
Yeah, I highly agree. Like a lot of these professors, at least a good two or three of them will definitely remember you because you worked with them before. I would also say when it comes to at least when I applied, I also asked some of my organization like board members because I was a board member for some of the local organizations here, and I was able to reach out to some of them to be able to talk about like my leadership skills from there. And it's kind of a similar process of that of like asking like some professors, it's like they kind of want to see like your CV or see like a letter of intent so that way they can kind of base like their responses off of like what you would want to like deliver to these residency program directors. And with these and the thing is, I gotta put this out there because whenever anyone says letter of recommendation, it's really a form that they fill out, but it's also a lot of subjective information that is encouraged for all recommenders to fill in. So that's that. All right, so hopefully for those who are listening to this session, hopefully you get a taste as to what the non-traditional pathway looks like. You can reach out to me, Mary Ngo, on LinkedIn, or you can also reach out to me by my VA email, mary.ngo number 2 at va.gov.
So you can find me on LinkedIn as well, Amy Lee, or my personal email address is amylee1 at gmail.com, all spelled out. So you could email me and I will get back to you if you have any questions.
All right, it's been a pleasure to talk with you, Amy, and I'm happy to see what residency has in store for both of us.
Me too. It was really great meeting you. I mean, we haven't been able to talk in person, so it was really great to hear your story. And thanks for, meeting with me to share these to the podcast listeners today.
All right. On behalf of us in the Pharmacy Podcast Network, we hope you enjoy our session and I hope you can listen to the next one.
Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Pharmacy Residency Podcast, a member of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. You might also like to check out our available residency audiobooks at pharmacyresidencypodcast.com/books, where you can get your first book free if you've never been on Audible before, or work one-on-one with me as a professional editor at residency.teachable.com. Feel free to send an invite to connect with me, Tony PharmD, on LinkedIn, or email me at tonythepharmacist@gmail.com with questions. Music was by Policy.